Well, let's get more now on the political game of chess, otherwise known as Brexit, of course. The UK is meant to leave the EU in just 54 days now, but some MPs are trying to force the Prime Minister to ask for an extension, while he is trying to get them to agree to a general election. So, what's going on? Why? And what might happen next? So many questions. And I'm joined from Westminster by The Guardian's political correspondent, Kate Proctor, and Tom Harwood from the political blog site, Guido Fawkes, who hopefully can help fathom all of this out. Great to see you both. I'm going to ask you this first. We'll get into the nitty-gritty in a moment, but I'd like to get your thoughts really on what has been the most tumultuous week. Tom, how would you sum it up briefly?
It's what words can you use to sum it up? We have had politicians spinning around in just about every direction, and it's been quite hard to follow for the most part. You've had at the beginning of the week the Labour Party sticking to their line that they'd quite like an election, and it looking touch and go whether this anti-no deal legislation would pass. Then you had the Labour Party say, OK, we don't want an election, but we would countenance one if this legislation passes. Then the legislation passes, it receives royal assent, and the Labour Party still refuse an election. Meanwhile, we've had resignations from the Conservative Party. We've had 20 anti-Brexit rebels kicked out of the Conservative Party. We've had defections to the Liberal Democrats. We've had Liberal Democrats hopping from one seat to the other. We've had a tumultuous week, and it's quite hard to keep on top of it. It's understandable that it's been very chaotic, and next week is unlikely to be any different.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it, Kate? I mean, it's been the most incredible week. I think we're all taking a bit of a breather today because we know next week is potentially going to be just as explosive.
Yeah, absolutely. Boris Johnson, well, first and foremost, I'd say if anyone's had a terrible week, it's been Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. And we can talk about Labour and we can talk about the Lib Dems, but really that is relatively on the sidelines when we're talking about an absolutely terrible week for the government in which things have completely imploded left, right and centre. You've had Boris Johnson's own brother saying that, you know, he can't continue as an MP anymore. We had this absolutely terrible press conference up in Yorkshire. I was sat in the audience there with the police all backing Boris Johnson, and then the police actually saying they didn't want to be used as a political tool, essentially, by the Prime Minister. And then we're going to go forward, and we're going back and we're going to this election. We're going to the question of an election, and Boris Johnson says that he wants to try and call one again, so we might have this vote on Monday. You know, he says that's what he's going to do. We're never quite sure up until the last moment whether these votes go down, but that's unlikely to pass. And then where are we again? It looks like we're going to go to prorogation at some point later on in the week. In the meantime, there's still no tangible deal or any kind of shift on a deal with Brussels. So this week really is so difficult. It's difficult to see how it pans out. So please don't ask for any predictions. But all we can say is it's going to be very, very chaotic from Monday morning onwards.
All right, well, I'll make sure I don't do that. So, Tom, we're hearing now that the Prime Minister is prepared to break the law. He's saying that could be something that he's prepared to do. I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean we could see Boris Johnson in court and potentially in jail?
I think it's more likely that the Prime Minister would resign or call a vote of no confidence in his own government than actively break the law as it now is. There's no way that Boris Johnson would would send a letter to the European Union asking for an extension. He's staked his whole premiership on the idea that we leave at the end of October. We can't keep having a can-kicking premiership. That way you don't get deals. Deadlines make deals, not delays. So it's quite clear that if Boris Johnson can't get a general election, he'll, through this vote on Monday, which requires 2/3 of the House of Commons to vote for it under the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, he will try another way, and that could involve the quite unprecedented step of voting no confidence in his own government, or even resigning as Prime Minister. But what I would say, just coming back on that point earlier about the tumultuous week we've seen in Westminster, it's quite simple to people outside the Westminster bubble what's going on. It's actually understandable that the Conservatives have still a commanding poll lead over the Labour Party, even after the week that they've had. What has clearly happened in Westminster this week is you've had a coalition of politicians against the people trying to frustrate that referendum result. What you see is a mess on the opposition benches, collusion between politicians in this country and politicians in the European Union trying to work against our exit from the European Union, and a Conservative Party that ends the week actually more united with its anti-Brexit rebels no longer in the party. So it's in a stronger position, conversely, to fight a general election, even though it's a weaker position in Parliament.
Kate, what do you say to that?
I mean, I just don't know how you can say that. Boris Johnson's a Prime Minister. He's Prime Minister of the Conservative Party. He's just kicked out 20 members of the party who have historic roots and represent a certain type of idea within the Conservative Party, which you're blocking that down and saying that you're no longer welcome. He has actually reduced his own majority. And the idea that the Conservatives are now united, I just think is completely for the birds. And OK, so they might be doing well in the polls right now, but I mean, what about the threat of the Brexit Party? I mean, that lots and lots of people are very, very anxious about an election. Because in terms of the Conservative Party votes, they're actually very fearful that the Brexit Party will sort of surge in and take some of those seats. So I think the idea that to place all of the chaos on Labour and the Lib Dems and those groups that are trying to basically stop no-deal Brexit, whilst the government itself can't even command a majority and can't even get through its own legislation, and casting around and putting all these aspersions on all these other parties, it just shows the fundamental weakness of Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party at the moment. And we've heard all these cabinet briefings as well. People are really, really unhappy with the way that Dominic Cummings, who's Boris Johnson's chief strategist, they're really unhappy at the way he's running things. They think it's too harsh. They think he's way too strict. They think that he's putting through a kind of very hard line ideology really around Brexit that just isn't going to kind of stand the test of time. And I know all of this is being pitted about parliamentarians not listening to the people, but Parliament is there to do a job. It's there to scrutinise, and it is working perfectly within the rules at which Parliament has been invested in. So I think the idea that Boris Johnson and that there's some kind of, the weakness is on the other side, I just think is crazy.
You're itching to get in, Tom. Go on.
Boris has been incredibly decisive this week, and by removing those barnacles from the boat, if you like, by removing those people who were going back on the Conservative manifesto commitments that they signed up in order to keep no deal on the table, in order to get that good deal that we all want to see at the end of October. By removing those people from the party who actually, in effect, voted no confidence in their government in the same way that John Major removed rebels from his party, that has made the party more united in Parliament, smaller in Parliament, but more united, and that puts it in a stronger stead for a general election. And you talk about the threat from the Brexit Party. It's clear that threat diminishes if the party is united and strong on its core message of leaving the European Union. So this move this week is making it more likely that the Conservative Party will do well in an election, and that's why the opposition don't want to see one.
So what do you think he's going to do about the ERG, the Spartan group? Do you think that they're going to keep their places in the Conservative Party? Because they have said it's not just the backstop they don't like. They hate so much about the deal. So if the ERG aren't going to be happy with whatever Boris Johnson comes back with, is he going to get rid of them as well?
Well, Boris has actually said this week that, yes, if he brings back a deal that he views as satisfactory, then of course that would apply the same way round. That would have the same sort of confidence motion attached. But what's crucial is that Parliament has actually already voted for a deal that looks like the one that Boris Johnson wants to achieve with the European Union. There was a majority in the House of Commons for the Brady Amendment, which was a similar deal to the one that Boris Johnson is trying to reach. But the fundamental point here is that the European Union will not grant a single concession unless it can see that the United Kingdom is committed to leaving. If there's a chance that the UK could remain, why on earth would they offer a better deal?
I just want to move the conversation on slightly. Kate, perhaps I can ask you about some of the language that Boris Johnson has been using recently. He called David Cameron in some documents which were discovered by our political correspondent, a girly swat. He called Jeremy Corbyn this week a big girl's blouse. What are your thoughts on that? Because many critics have said this is sexist language.
Well, I just think it's completely childish, and it just shows the kind of childish mentality that the Prime Minister has. I mean, I don't find that offensive, because I think that's really low down on the list of offensive things that Boris Johnson has said. So, I'm sure many people will find it sexist and will think it's. But I just think it's more childish, it's stupid, it's ridiculous. And it just shows kind of the way that he operates. You know, he's always throwing out these flippant phrases and these flippant words, and sometimes you can shrug them off, and sometimes they are deeply offensive. And I'm going to go back to that article that he wrote in the Telegraph, where he said that Muslim women that wear the full face veil, the niqab, resemble letterboxes. And if you're going to launch some liberal defence around that, Tom, then I can argue against that, no problem.
Well, I mean, it was a liberal defence of people wearing whatever they want to wear, actually against the Danish ban that came in, the French ban that came in, this sort of continental view that people shouldn't be allowed to wear what they want. He was standing in that British liberal tradition of allowing people to do what they want to do, and it was a fantastic article. And the way that journalists have tried to pick out of context points
all right,
from
Tom,
it
but what about these latest
comments on the Prime Minister from it is ridiculous.
What about these latest comments, though, Tom? Girly swat, a big girl's blouse. I mean, it's not language appropriate, is it, for someone in his office?
I don't know. I think it was in the House of Commons pretty of the moment, saying big girls' blouse is a lot less of an insult than we've heard across the dispatch box from many other prime ministers. I think that really we're reading far too much into phrases from the Prime Minister that really the wider country does not care about. What people want to see is what's going on domestic policy and whether or not we leave the European Union. And yes, in the last however many months, the Prime Minister has used 2 insults that involve the word girl. I'm not sure that's highest on the list of most people's priorities.
OK, we must leave it there. Great to get your thoughts as always. Kate Proctor from The Guardian, Tom Harwood from Guido Fawkes. Thank you.